Hi y'all, welcome back to the garden. Today we're going to be covering some roses that I'm planting this year in the garden, both in the cut flower space and in the landscape. I've got 12 to go over with you, but at the end of the video I'm going to tell you a couple that I haven't ordered yet that I grew at the last property that I really enjoyed that I'll probably be ordering again. One of them is out of stock. But I'm keeping an eye on it on 𝗓𝗡𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗧.com. So all of my roses this year are coming from 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗧.com. If you've been watching since last fall, you know I'm a brand ambassador this year, and you can get 20% off your order all season long, all year long at 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗧.com using the coupon code Southern24. No spaces, all caps. I've used it multiple times already, so we know it works, and several other people have. And it's a really exciting time. This is Lily. Margot was in the last video, so I figured we'd bring Lily and she could be in this one. She's not quite as still as her sister, so she may run off in the middle of it if I'm not giving her enough pets. But it's a cold day today. We had some snow, and let's just get into the roses. So when I was picking roses for the cut flower garden, that was my first priority this year. I wanted one of about every color and then some neutrals just to have a good balance across any type of color bouquet that I would want. You know, I typically lean towards the peaches, the yellows, the coral roses. I have lots of those at my last garden, and there are some that are definitely going to be added to this garden. I have an interesting history with roses. When we moved into the last house, there was some landscape drift roses there. And I removed them because they were really terribly placed. One was right under the hose bib of the house, so you could hardly get to the hose bib. And after removing those, it was my determination that I would not be planting any more roses in that garden. And lo and behold, just a few years later, I had quite a few in the garden. So there are none currently on this property other than those I planted in the fall. And so we're going to be adding a lot of them this year, and then several more in years to come as I develop some more spaces. 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗧.com only grows on root roses, which is really important for those of us who live up north where it's colder. On root roses are grown on their own roots, and so they're cut, stuck in soil or a growing medium, and then it develops its own roots. A lot of the roses you'll find at your garden center sometimes will be grafted roses, which means there'll be a graft union on there. Sometimes you can get shoots from below the rootstock, which is typically Dr. Huey, which is the common rootstock used, and it's a red rose. And so if you live in a colder climate, your rose could die all the way back to the ground potentially, or the top could die and the root could live because those rootstocks are used because they're typically hardier, and then you'll have a rose come back that is not the same variety that you planted. And so on-root roses are really healthy and really great for environments like ours, and you'll always be guaranteed that they'll be true when they come back from the roots. Heirloom Roses has been around for over 50 years, and if you go on their website, what I really like about their website is if you choose Shop All Roses, you can see nearly every type of category you would want from a rose, from color, fragrance, characteristics, bloom type, growing zone, height, rebloom, width, and whether it's in stock or not. How I picked out these roses I'm going over today, the first 9 of them anyway, some of them I'd seen before and I wanted, but I went and chose cutting roses. And so if you look under the characteristics there, you can select cutting, and they have 358 varieties there that say they are good for cutting. You can then further narrow down by your zone and then color. So the first one I'm going to go over is called Sunbelt Plum Perfect, and it is a purple rose, really beautiful and roughly. It's not the biggest rose, 3 by 3, but typically those rose heights are sizing that a rose can be maintained at, and I learned that over the past couple years because I purchased a David Austin rose called Lady of Shalott, which I've grown at the last garden. It had a certain sizing on the website, and it actually got really massive and I had to move it. So typically the sizing on roses is the height it can be maintained out easily. So always placement is really important, and pruning on those when needed to keep them healthy. So Sunbelt Plum Perfect gets 3 by 3, and it's hardy down to zone 5. So I'm zone 6, that's negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Zone 5 is negative 20. And because this is a smaller rose, it also says it would do really well in containers. I've already got the spacing out for these particular roses jotted out on the cut flower space that I'm setting up, and I'll show you in another video. This one's going to be going towards the southmost side, because it is one of the smallest ones, and the largest ones will go on the northmost side, so everything can get really good light all the way back from shortest to tallest. And I'm just getting one of these varieties this year of each one, and I'm going to trial them, and if they perform really well this year, I'll look at repeating those so I can have more than one plant growing a rose. The goal for the cut flower garden is not to become a cut flower farmer, but it is to be able to have enough roses and other plants to make beautiful bouquets whenever I want them and just to enjoy. So the next one I'll go over is Lady of Shalott, and I just mentioned that one, and it is an orange rose. The stats say it gets 5 by 4, but I know that is a very vigorous one, so I believe I placed this one on the northernmost side of the plot that I've set out for the cut flower garden, so it can get kind of unruly if it needs to, but produce lots of really beautiful blooms. This is the color of rose between yellow and orange that I really love, and I have some photos that I took from the last garden that I'll show you, but also some roses from 𝗩𝗟𝗏𝗡𝗧𝗏, and it is just beautiful if you're into that type of color of a rose. Certainly check out Lady of Shalott. So a little more hardy than the last one I showed you, down to -30. And one of the things I really like about 𝗩𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗧𝗏 is not only does it list the zone, but it also lists the temperature. So if you are not sure what zone you are, but you do know how cold it gets in your area, you can pick the temperature range of the lowest temperature that you get, and that'll tell you whether the rose will be hardy or not. The next one I was a little conflicted with for a pink, but I chose All Dressed Up because the reviews for this rose just said it was really prolific and produced a ton of blooms, and it gets roughly 5 by 4, so about the same size as Lady of Shalott, but really gorgeous. Alternatively, in a rose I'm going to look at getting in another order this year that is currently out of stock, is Olivia Rose Alston. I had this rose at the last house. It was also very prolific, and it was probably one of my favorite smelling roses. It smelled very peppery to me, which I really love, and just the most beautiful cupped blooms. But All Dressed Up is also a really beautiful rose that was recommended, and it was a new introduction last year. And to have such good reviews, its first year of release last year, is really an indicator that it will do really well. It says it can take partial shade, so if you have a spot that you could put this rose and not a whole lot of sun, it may grow pretty well, but obviously it's going to produce the best blooms for you in full sun. The next rose on my list was a white rose. You can't have a cut flower garden of roses without a white rose. At the last house, I had a rose called Tranquility. That was one of the ones that I removed because it got rose rosette. So this time, this go round, I'm going with one called Parfuma Madame Anisette, and it looks really beautiful. It's not like perfectly white based on the pictures I've seen. It does have a little bit of a creamy center, but that's okay. We'll give it a try. If it does really well, I'll be adding more of those to my garden. And it was recommended, highly recommended, and it gets roughly 4 foot tall and 2 foot wide. So it has a little bit of a more narrow structure there, and hardy down to zone 5. For my yellow rose, yellow is one of my favorite color for roses. I really love the Poet's Wife, which I'll talk to you later, but I ordered a different one that will go in the cut flower garden that's supposed to be a really prolific bloomer. I saw this one on their website, but I'd also been watching some YouTube videos over winter for rose recommendations for a cut flower space and looking at some rose experts and what they recommended, and it was Sunbelt, South Africa. And this one is not necessarily the clearest yellow that I really like that comes from the Poet's Wife, but it's a little more orangey. It does have that really dark foliage I like on a rose, so I prefer roses that have really dark foliage just because they look better in the landscape. They look healthier rather than that lighter green color. But I think this one's going to be really nice. It also gets pretty big, 4 to 5 foot tall and 4 foot wide, hardy down to zone 6, so our zone, so it should be good here. And after seeing all of the recommendations for this rose, this is primarily why I ordered it, but it also had really good reviews, 5 stars on Heirloom Rose's website. My next rose is a red rose. Now, I have never grown a red rose in my garden. Red roses are not my favorite. They remind me of Valentine's Day, so I feel like naturally they just have a short window of kind of use for arrangements. But you can't have a cut flower garden without red roses. So I asked Robin from Heirloom Roses what red she would recommend, because there are a lot of them out there, and that's a very popular color for roses. And she recommended Oklahoma for both its bloom and its ability to be cut really well. There were some other ones she thought were really good, but Oklahoma was her favorite. This one gets roughly 5 foot tall and 4 foot wide. Now it is only hardy down to zone 7, and I'm in zone 6, so that's 0 degrees. We did have some negative temperatures this past week, but typically in Ohio, southwest Ohio, when it dips into the negative, it's only for a few days this part of January. And then it starts warming back up quite quickly. So this is typically the coldest time of year. And so I think it'll be okay here. If it doesn't survive over winter, I'll select a different rose for next year. But I think it will probably be okay given its location and placement. The interesting thing about this rose is it's a very dark red, and it's described on the website as black velvet in warm weather. It's also fragrant and can be used in containers. If I were you, I would make sure you were in zone 7, but I'm going to be trialing it in zone 6 this year, and so if it survives well, then those of you who are in lower zones like me can pick it out as well, and we'll see how it does. So the next rose is Koko Loko, which I went over in last year's video in March by Heirloom Roses catalog. I hope you were able to pick up your catalog. If you did not, you can go to heirloomroses.com and pick one up for free and have one sent out to you. And what I really love about the catalog is I'm looking at the colors, like I mentioned. They actually have an entire color palette in here so you can look through every color of the rose in their catalog, like this, with the names under it. So if you're looking for a specific color in a gradient, which is really cool, you can do that. But Koko Loko is also seen listed in several books that I've been reading this winter, including A Year Full of Flowers by Sarah Raven. It's specifically listed Koko Loko and 𝗍𝗓𝗔𝗡𝗧, which is also one I picked up. And if you need a book just about recommended flower varieties, I have found this book to be really good as I've been looking for it. She provides a listing of actual varieties of all sorts of plants that she really likes. So salvias, she even breaks it down by the perennial, but there's a whole section on roses. And you can see she has a beautiful rose garden, and she goes over and provides some photos of her recommended varieties, some beautiful bouquets in here, which is really nice to just look at on the dining room table. But Koko Loko is, I don't think it's listed in a photo here, but this is 𝗍𝗓𝗔𝗡𝗧, which I'll talk about next. So Koko Loko is a little smaller, 3 to 4 foot tall, 3 foot wide, hardy down to zone 6, and a repeat bloomer. Good for cutting. So I was told by Heirloom Roses that this one takes a little while to get going, but after its second or third year, it really takes off and becomes prolific. So this one will probably be a little slower this year. All plant varieties have a little different temperament, so it may come along a little slower than the rest, but we'll keep it fed, fertilized, and happy. And the really nice thing about the Koko Loko is it's like this creamy coffee color. So it's a good neutral to throw in with lots of other colors because it kind of blends some of those yellows, reds, oranges, even a little bit of purple looks like in its bloom. So it will be a perfect mix if I want to add any of the roses that I've got in this collection together. It'll be a good neutral to add to that. The next one is 𝗍𝗓𝗔𝗡𝗧, which is similar, a little different bloom structure than Koko Loko, but it's a yellow, a light yellow, pale. And it looks like 𝗍𝗓𝗔𝗡𝗧 mustard. And it's new for 2023 as well. So it's a newer rose and also has all 5-star reviews on the website. Roughly 5 foot tall, 4 foot wide, repeat blooming, and hardy down to zone 6. This one also produces really big blooms, 4 1/4 inches with 26 to 40 petals each. The next one on my list for the cutting garden, which may not make it to the cutting garden because I love it so much, I may end up placing it up front here, or I may actually order another one to have one both in the cutting garden and in the landscape, and that is Distant Drums. This rose, Heirloom Rose sent me last year, or maybe I think it was the end of 2022, and I planted it that fall. Didn't get a whole lot of blooms off of it, but it was the first thing to bloom right at the beginning of May. I actually will put a picture on the screen, and I showed that in a video when I was doing a garden tour in the middle of May, the first blooming rose in the garden. I think it was around May 15th, and it is gorgeous. It is pink, yellow, orange, all of the colors that I love, and it smells really nice. It's already down to zone 5, and the blooms are just really large, so 4 inches wide, similar to the size of 𝗍𝗓𝗔𝗡𝗧 that I just mentioned. It is a smaller one, 4 foot tall, 3 foot wide, but after you've seen this rose in person, and I'll show you some photos, if you're into those colors, this is definitely one to pick up. Now, they also have one called Distant Thunder, which is a kind of, I think it's a child of Distant Drums. So let's talk about the Poet's Wife, which is a David Austin rose that I had in my last garden next to the pergola patio section. One of my favorites, very clear yellow, very beautiful smell. One of my favorites outside of Olivia Rose Austin. And I really love it because it's so clear yellow. It gets 4x4, and it was pretty vigorous at my last home, hardy down to zone 5, so below us -20 degrees. And I actually love this one so much that I have several photos of it from both my phone and my bigger camera that I'll show you, and I just posted it to Instagram, a video that I found that I shot last year of it blooming. Really beautiful. Now, one thing I did have an issue with this rose was it would get little pink spots on it, and that's because I had overhead irrigation at the last house. That won't be a problem in this garden because, one, I don't have irrigation at all other than the drip irrigation I'm installing, and if I install irrigation in the future, that will not spray onto the beds. I'll make sure that I design the system better than it was designed at the last home. I've purchased 2 climbing roses, one called Arbor Rose Kiss Me Kate. If you watch my friend Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm, you're probably familiar with the Arbor Rose collection. They are very vigorous, healthy arbor roses to actually place on arbors or climb on walls or whatever kind of climbing aspect you want to put them on. I will probably be putting this one on the little pool house area that kind of covers the pump and everything to the pool out back and allowing it to climb up on the side of it. It will get roughly 7 foot tall, 4 foot wide, so it's not a huge climber. This also may look good just placed on the fence and allow it to spread along the fence, so that could be an option as well. But this one is listed as heirloom roses as exceptionally fragrant, which is one of their highest level of fragrance categories when you go on their website. It has disease-resistant foliage and really beautiful, lush, full blooms. The last climber I picked out for now is Teasing Georgia, and this one I did have at the last garden, and I placed it on the moon gate that I had at the last garden, 2 of them to grow along either side, and it was growing incredibly well when I left, and I'm excited to add it back to this garden. A little bit of that southern flair and the naming there. Really big flowers, 4 to 5 inches wide with 50 plus petals, and it is also just that perfectly yellow, clear yellow color, a little more of the white around the outside of it, but really nice and a really good fragrance as well, and it's won several awards. It's hardy down to zone 5, so climbing roses specifically, there's all sorts of things you can do to help them survive in zones, lower zones, including like laying them down and covering them with mulch, pulling all the canes down. I'm not one of those gardeners who is gonna spend a lot of time keeping those things hardy. If it can't survive just out in the open in winter, then it won't be in my garden. And this one did really well for me in our zone, and I expect it's going to do really well here. This is one that I'm probably going to train along the fence behind me back here to grow up and down to cover, you know, on the other side across from a hydrangea hedge that I planted last fall. And those are the 12 roses that I've currently placed for order with heirloom roses. We'll go over a couple more that I had in my last garden that I just want to tell you about in case you're looking on Heirloom Roses website or looking for some beautiful roses to grow this year. Olivia Rose Austin, I mentioned previously, beautiful pink rose, beautiful smell, really good habit, really prolific once it gets going. I had this one, it wasn't even in a full sun location necessarily. It was kind of on the north side of the patio, north side of the house. So it got quite a bit of shade until later in the evening, and it still bloomed really, really well for me. 𝗍𝗓𝗏𝗧 is also one I really like. The actual blooms on it do not completely fully open up. They're really kind of cupped. but it also smelled really nicely. I had this one out front at the last house, and then I moved it when I was redesigning that garden space, because when the tree was removed, it wasn't placed very well right there in the middle. But I will probably be adding this one back to the garden later. This is also one of the ones that's kind of white, that had some issues with some spotting with overhead irrigation. But like I said, we wouldn't have this problem here. But those are things I want you to be aware of in case you do have an overhead irrigation sprinkler system that kind of blows into your flower beds. Any roses that are yellow or white may have issues with spots on them if you have overhead irrigation. So I have a bit of a history of growing bare root roses initially in my garden. And the reason for that is I thought they would be a little more vigorous than the own root roses that you purchase, because they're just have a bigger root system to begin with. And I'll tell you, that was not actually the case oftentimes. Additionally, the reason I've stopped purchasing bare root roses is because I have often received the incorrect rose from the companies that I've ordered from. On 3 separate orders, on 3 separate occasions, I've been shipped a rose, and when it bloomed, it was not the rose that I ordered. Now, the issue with bare root roses is there's a limited time they can be dug, shipped, and sold, and that's in the very early springtime. Typically, you'll order them in the fall and winter, and they'll be shipped in spring. By the time those roses get settled in and start blooming, it is usually outside of the bare root shipping season. So what that means is if you didn't get the rose that you ordered, like I had on 3 separate occasions, then you cannot get that rose again until the next year. So if you're planting any garden, that can be a real bummer. So that's one of the reasons I've switched to own root roses. I've never had an issue with any of the orders I placed from heirloomroses.com coming in correctly. And even if I did, I can order another one and get the same variety same year, because they can be shipped all season long as it's warm, and the roses will survive transit well. If you're new to roses, or there's something that you want to grow, I would encourage you to check out heirloomroses.com. There's also just a wealth of information on how to take care of roses, and we'll be going over some of that information later this year as well when my roses arrive. They're set to arrive April 26th, I think, is when I picked, which is really nice on their website. You can actually pick the date you want them to arrive now rather than when you want them shipped, and they'll handle all the logistics on the back end to get them to you on the day or close to the date that you selected. Now here, our last frost date is not typically until Mother's Day. Sometimes it's early as April 20th. I've seen it since I've lived here be like April 20th, 23rd, but we've also had late frosts around May 5th, and so I'm going to get them here on the 26th, get them acclimated to our weather here, and if we have a frost, I'm not actually going to put them in the ground until after Mother's Day. That way I can have them here, get them settled in before they get placed in the ground, keep them happy and loved, and then watch them grow on beautifully throughout the season. If you've not yet picked up your Heirloom Roses catalog for the season, I still would encourage you to go pick one out. Even if you're not going to order any this spring, you can order some later in the year. But what I love most about their catalog, you can find one that fits any color you want and your style. Thank you guys for joining me. Stay tuned, because the next couple of videos are going to be about the annuals I'm ordering in spring, or have already ordered for spring, which we'll be going to check out at 𝗧𝗛𝗍𝗧𝗦 in April. And then I'll be going over a video of what I plan to do and developments for this property. And as it warms up outside, I'll be able to get my feet started doing some outside work, like prepping garden spaces before we have our last frost. So March time's typically when I start doing that, because it'll get in at 60s, 50s, 60s in the afternoon, which is really nice. And I'm ready to get started and get going. Thank you guys for joining me, and remember, be a light. Take care. Bye.